A pleasure to meet y'all at last. And you know what? Right now, in case you haven't already noticed behind me, well, that's only because here on HJN, it's about time that I focus on what I've originally committed to with the part 2 to Flying with the Foam. If you don't remember, in early 2021, where I basically did 87 total reviews, HJN style, on various Nerf blasters that I've collected over the years, then basically that's where I'm going to be going again. This is the second time now that I've done this. And this behind me is basically an old familiar setting that you might already be familiar with. That's only because, though, I got these episodes pre-recorded, or many of them to say the least. I will of course be working on many of the others as time goes on, and more importantly, as I get my hands on some other blasters. But right now, I do have a handful here that I could talk about in this exact setting. So if you see this behind me, as opposed to many other environments that I might be around in, that's only because, well, like I said, with all the time that I have left until 2024, well, in terms of pre-recording the stuff that is, of course, you will be seeing this in 2024. The point is that this is, in fact, a 2.0 of Flying with the Foam. But I'm not really going to call it that. Let's call it something different, shall we? How about Super Foam Flying? Yeah, Super Foam Flying for the win. That's basically what's going to be happening here. Well, anyways, in terms of this little sequel series that's happening within the series of Honest J Nowak, it's time to debut with quite possibly the best Nerf blaster that I could have ever spent money on in general. The Zombie Strike Contractor. Now, you're probably wondering, how on earth is this the best blaster that I've ever had in my life? Well, it's simple, really. That's pretty much one example, but now it's time for another one. Yeah, that's not really well explained there. That's more like it. That's probably all you need to know at this point. I might as well go ahead and explain a little bit why that is, though. This is, in fact, well, at the time this was released in late 2020, this would be the second entry into a Zombie Strike subsidiary, which I technically don't really remember the name very well to this, but in case you aren't very familiar with the deco that's on here, including this high voltage sign, as well as these blue and red parts, then well, you'd probably also be very familiar with the fact that this blaster has a battery compartment. It requires a few AAA batteries to operate, but of course, I'm not really a fan of sound effects being applied towards various blasters for any particular reason. I just more like the sounds that naturally come out of a blaster, like this, that, as well as that. So, the Contractor itself is a great blaster, already for what it does have to offer on the outside, but what does it have to offer otherwise? On the inside, or whatnot? Well, like I said, it does feature sound effects, but it also features some light-up effects, like right here and here, because like I said, this is a second blaster that came out of that particular little sub-series that went on within the Zombie Strike series itself. Also, getting to know about the grips, primary grip is back here, no stock, but that's fine. Because what really makes up for this is this grip right here, used to prime the blaster. If you're familiar with the Battle Scout, which was released in the Modulus lineup, and then of course it was re-released as part of the Battle Camo series, but there, I just refer to it as the Combiner. But do expect me to review that pretty soon, here on Super Foam Flying. But for the most part, this is probably by far the best in terms of how you can get with ergonomics. And only a few blasters, again, have had this sort of thing on them, but that's probably what happens when you basically have some things take place. Wow, that's basically one dart. That was another dud, but you know what? That's fine. Because other than the decorations on this, the aesthetics, the functionality, there's also quite a lot more here. An 8-dart cylinder, of course, with a rather satisfying sort of click that it makes when it twists. A tactical rail on the top, which you can put anything on, like let's say a scavenger flashlights. Of course, I've already talked about the scavenger during the first Flying with the Foam series itself on HJN. Of course, you already know that it turns on like that. Has a green sort of glow that comes on it. Of course, you can see it. It's right here, actually. Right where my finger is. But again, the Contractor itself, of all Zombie Strike blasters that I've ever had the ire to spend money on, of any sorts, and play with for a little while, the experience I managed to get with this blaster, which is not very long, but it still is by far some of the best time I've ever spent with any blaster on a given day. So we also can't forget the fact that this is yet another one of those examples where you can slam fire this thing. Breeze through an entire 8-dart cylinder, if you so choose to do so. But otherwise, it still is worthily noted that for something like this, I really do, indeed, like to give this thing as big of a score as possible. Because with many of the other blasters that I have given scores out to, especially when it comes to Nerf Secret Revealed Aftersaught, as well as the original Flying with the Foam, in terms of how I'm going to give the Contractor when it comes to scoring, I might just be pretty high for today. So, to summarize, an impressive color scheme combined with various other attributes like sound effects and light up effects, impressive ergonomics, a decent capacity with satisfying sound effects and all that good stuff, and then of course practicality, smaller size in comparison to other large blasters, and a bit nice of a profile where it's nice and slim in comparison to other blasters as well. This leads me to give it a rather high score, a 9.7 out of 10. So I guess right off the bat, we're really starting on a huge high note. But that's only because you never know. Maybe there might be other blasters along the way that I might just find better somehow. But, of course, we still have a long way to go through here because for Super Foam Fly-In, I'm going to be even bigger and better in comparison to what Flying with the Foam basically did. A grand total of 87 blasters I had reviewed during that particular time period, but here is where we get to a whopping 95 blasters, and all of which were blasters that I have not yet talked about. Some were even featured in Aftersaught in comparison to this. Otherwise, this is just pretty much what that whole thing's about. And also what this is going to be about for at least a few more months. And I do have a lot of other blasters here to show off for this point in time, so be prepared for that moment. But if you want to see more go down on my channel, then make sure that you like, subscribe, comment, follow me on social media, and stay on the Hollywood side.